The Walter Cronkite School of Journalism and Mass Communication at Arizona State University is a proud supporter of Indian Country Today. Students at Cronkite News and Gaylord College at the University of Oklahoma cover Indigenous communities together. This important work is distributed by more than 100 news organizations. This collaboration provides a much-needed boost to coverage of Native American communities nationwide. Learn more at cronkitenews.azpbs.org.
This is Indian Country Today.
Esquili, yes, thank you for joining us. I'm Patty Thalohungva. Here are the headlines from Indian Country Today. The Bureau of Land Management is offering a $10,000 reward to help find and arrest vandals who defaced a prehistoric petroglyph. It's known as the Birthing Rock and contains petroglyphs that date back thousands of years. It's near Moab, Utah, in the southern part of the state. Last week, vandals scratched obscenities into the rock and wrote the words "white power" over 2 figures. These are images of the rock before the vandalism. The agency is offering anonymity to anyone with information leading to the arrest and conviction of the vandals. Tomorrow is National Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women Awareness Day. In Montana's Bighorn County, there are fewer than 14,000 residents, yet Bighorn has the highest rates of missing and murdered Indigenous people cases in the U.S. To date, 86% of those cases are unsolved. Bighorn County is in the north-central part of the state. A new documentary called Say Her Name covers this issue. The documentary explores the causes of the epidemic as well as law enforcement's inability to stop the violence. The film's director, Rain, served on President Biden's Indigenous Policy Committee. Her documentary, Say Her Name, will premiere during a forum held by Native News Online and will also be available to watch online. May is National Foster Care Awareness Month. Across the country, there are more than 10,000 Native children who are in the system. And in Utah, there are 145 children in foster care. The state's foster care department works to place Native children with Native foster families.
So I personally have seen children thrive, seeing how they are able to connect more easily with their culture if they are placed in a Native home. So for example, I have a Native family who is caring for a child from a different tribe, but she's able to provide that cultural connection for that child.
Benally says the department is hosting its 2nd annual Moccasin 5K this month. The run is meant to help bring awareness to foster care and promote a safe and loving home for Native children. The race is set for May 15th, and there will also be a virtual run option. The Cherokee Nation's Tribal Youth Council is starting its new term. 17 youth were sworn into office earlier this month during a virtual inauguration ceremony. The council identifies issues affecting Cherokee youth and pass on recommendations to both the council and the administration. Andigoy News reports the Youth Council will learn the Cherokee Nation Constitution and bylaws. Andigoy means the news in the Cherokee language. We spoke with 2 newly elected youth council members to see why they wanted to be a part of this council.
Government that we have functioning right in our backyard here in Tahlequah. And so for me, it was just an experience to gain more knowledge of how Cherokee Nation functions as a sovereign government.
The president of the Youth Council believes in one of the most basic principles of a tribe.
Tribes are nothing without their language. That's a foundational aspect that we've had, since the beginning of time, really. And so the Youth Council has in the past worked to encourage youth to speak their language every day in their life.
The Youth Council Leadership Program started in 1989. They also serve as ambassadors of the Cherokee Nation. A new book explores what it means to be male and Indigenous. Karina Dominguez has more on the book that seeks a more balanced world.
Carrying the Burden of Peace is a curation of Indigenous stories that center around masculinity. The author is a scholar of Indigenous literature.
And so what I'm trying to do in the book is actually look to literary art and other forms of art in order to illuminate ways that Indigenous masculinities exceed those limitations. that masculinity isn't just what settler colonialism has told us.
He hopes the book encourages people to think about gender differently and says there's a need for more diverse masculinities that are nurturing and generative. That's the way Smokey Sumac sees it, a two-spirit person who transitioned from female to male. Sumac says trust is crucial.
In the course of this one poetic sequence, he writes, "Without trusting men, how do I become a man worthy of trust?"
I have to wrestle with what that means. And I also have to help other men be accountable to this because I know what it's like to live on both sides.
Sumac reflected on watching a grandfather with his grandchildren.
It doesn't always have to be that protector. It's the laughter. It's the caring, the holding, and the gentleness to me is something that I don't think we talk about enough.
Both hope the book influences conversations around Indigenous masculinity. In Phoenix, Karina Dominguez, Indian Country Today.
In southeast Alaska, Tlingit villagers say the state places more value on the life of a moose than the safety of human beings. They point to how hard it is to travel to remote Alaska communities. Oftentimes, they need snow machines, helicopters, planes, or boats to get around, and this is equipment state troopers may not have access to, but help could soon be on the way. The State Affairs Committee is considering Jim Cockrell to be the commissioner of the Alaska Department of Public Safety. Cockrell has extensive background in both public safety and wildlife management. He says if he's confirmed, he plans to better utilize resources to get more help to those people and places that need it. You can read more about this story on our website, IndianCountryToday.com, and look for the headline, "Are Alaska Wildlife Better Protected Than People?" And those are the headlines from Indian Country Today. I'm Patty Thalonhungva. When we come back, as spring moves into summer, that means the start of wildland forest fires.
We'll talk with the tribal chairman about how his tribe is preparing for the fire season. Rodney Costin is chairman of the Confederated Tribes of the Colville Reservation. His tribe is headquartered in Nespelem, Washington, which has experienced wildfires in the past. He's on today to talk to us about fire prevention and the importance of knowing the signs. Welcome, Chairman Costin.
Good morning.
I understand you have a pretty extensive wildfire ready plan. Maybe tell us about that.
Well, here on the Colville Reservation, we're located in north central Washington state, and we're on the dry side of Washington. And, we've had some pretty large catastrophic fires here in the last 10 years. And it's, this past year was pretty devastating. And so we've been really working hard to improve how our communications or address communications, as well as, working with our residents on the Colville Reservation and near the Colville Reservation, of how they can prepare and prepare their homes to be more fire resilient. And then also and this does occur again, I guess that's probably when this does occur again, that our people are as best prepared as possible. So we've actually been working with the Washington State Department of Natural Resources, and today launching the FireWise safety program, and where our members as well as our community members can register online. And in doing so, our fire management team, as well as the Washington State Department of Natural Resources, will visit your home and do an assessment, a risk assessment, so that you can be better prepared in preparing your home in the event that we do have a wildland fire, of looking at, doing fire-wise safety precautions or procedures just around your home, thinking about, fire resilient plants, removing combustible materials, keeping, any type of fuel away from your home. So there's just a number of steps that, could really help prevent losing your home and maybe losing your outbuildings. We have many ranches and farms here on our reservation many of our members who have livestock and agriculture. And so, these outbuildings and all of the large farm equipment and machinery and stuff, those are all pretty expensive, high ticketed items as well. And so we just want to, have everyone begin thinking about this because, the more they're prepared, that's helpful for us as well. Because when a wildland fire hits, we have to really look at contacting our people just to let them know, the stages of fire, if, there is potential of evacuation of their homes. And, so again, if the more they're prepared, that helps everybody involved.
So much of the West is just a tinderbox anyway. And you think about summers where smoke is virtually everywhere as you drive across the region. Has your thinking at all changed different about fire in the last decade or so? Well, everybody's, I think our thinking needs to change, because fires have changed themselves so much. 20, 30 years ago, if we got a fire here that was 10,000, 15,000 acres, that was a pretty large fire. This last year, at one time, we had about 5 fires on our reservation. Some of those converged into 2 fires on opposite ends of our reservation. And our reservation is 1.4 million acres and with a significant amount of commercial forests. And at the end of that fire, it burned about 200,000 acres. And I think we lost 78 homes and about 60 different structures. So the fires are getting more and more catastrophic. I think a lot of that is because of climate change. Our summers are really getting longer and hotter and drier. And, this last year, that was even, further complicated because the winds were so strong and there just was, the moisture, there was no moisture in the air. Everything was very dry and brittle. And it was the perfect storm for a fire. And this happened, in the late part of our summer in August. And it was very frightening. To me, it was very frightening to have that large of a fire impact so many of our people and so many of our homes. And it wasn't just on the Colville Reservation. There were fires all throughout the Pacific Northwest, and which Oregon as well had some pretty large fires. So usually when there is a fire, we work with both the state and federal government, who come in and provide assistance. And they did with this fire as well, but not to the level that they usually do, because there were just, the resources were just stretched so thin all across the Pacific Northwest. And, in Washington, there was a small town that actually completely burned down south of Spokane. And so that's how serious it was, during last year's fire season. And it is interesting because throughout the country, we talk a lot about how storms and hurricanes especially are changing because of the climate, but that same discussion doesn't seem to happen the same way with fire when it is becoming just the way it's changed, and the heat and the intensity is all very different, as you mentioned, than 10 years ago. Well, with the winds, the wind speeds were like up to 50, 60 miles an hour here. And so the fire traveled very quickly. And, I think it really caught a lot of our people off guard because they just weren't prepared. And, yet they thought the fire was maybe 15, 20 miles away and they felt relatively safe. But, that fire traveled, and at 15, 20 miles in less than half a day. And, many of our people, by the time their descriptions of the fire was just unbelievable. I talked to some of our homeowners who said that it was just like almost a monster. It was such a large roar. It made such a big sound. And some of the flames were like even 30, feet plus in the air. And, there was such a dense smoke that once it overcame them, they couldn't see. The visibility was very poor. And, some of our families, some of our people really escaped, just very narrowly with their lives. Many of our families lost everything. And
visiting some of those homes, after the fire, I just couldn't believe the devastation. There were, the light poles, the metal light poles that were just laying flat on the ground because the intensity of the heat was just so hot. And I couldn't believe that something like that could have happened, and then that the heat could just have molten a metal structure like that. But yeah, families lost everything. And so it was pretty devastating. There were just a lot of issues with this fire as well. Communication, was cut off at one time in both of our reservation communities of Inshalim and Omak, which made it very difficult, because the fire was so devastating. We needed that real-time contact with our people in the event that we needed to have them evacuated. And we had to evacuate a lot of homes. And then there were issues because of COVID as well. A lot of our people didn't want to go to a place where there were a lot of other people or that were going to be faced, even when we did, create shelters for them to go to. So getting them to even leave their homes was very difficult. I think that would be difficult for anybody. But even with the COVID situation, that brought on some unanticipated situations as well.
What are basic steps that the rest of the country can do to help?
Well, I think one of the things that we've been really pushing for is, the fires are large, they're catastrophic. Most of our federal and state agencies, even the funding that we receive from, to the tribes, that funding does not last, and it's just not adequate. And, for one thing too, they're just, we don't have even nationally like air equipment that can always be available. And that's just really critical, especially for places like here on the Cobble Reservation, because, we're 1.4 million acres. We have 2 mountain ranges on our reservation. The terrain is very steep in different places. And, to get ground crews to some of these places is really challenging and difficult and dangerous. So having air equipment makes all the difference for that initial attack to really put those fires out. We didn't have that here with the fire we had last year, and we did have the equipment available, but the wind speeds were so strong, as well as the visibility was so bad that we just couldn't get them in the air to fight the fire. But budgets, and really preparing, last year I got calls from tribal leaders down in Oregon, tribes that were along the coastline. And they just said they could not believe this fire was encroaching on them. What do I do as a tribal leader? We never get wildland fires here. And so I think, the fires, the nature of fires is changing. You're seeing areas that typically don't have wildfires that have had wildfires this last year. So I think just learning, how you can prepare as a government, as a tribal government, to address wildland fires, to find contact information, for other emergency services as well. But for us, we're trying to, like I said, prepare our members for that wildland urban interface, between the wildland fires, where it does come close to, our residences and even some of our towns on a reservation, to prepare them as best and as much as possible, with creating fire lines, removing as much fuel as we can, because when this fire hits, you just don't know in what direction it's going to go, and what can happen. Last year we had a lot of visitors, or we were worried too, because during the summer we had, people coming off the reservation on, and even during the times of COVID, we were trying to follow all of our state's guidelines and proclamations and our own, but still people were coming onto the reservation. And I think one of the most awful impacts that we had is a child's life was lost near Omak, and the parents were badly burned as well. And so when I got that news, my heart just hit the ground, but we want to address those situations better, and try and control, where a lot of our people are at, or even visitors coming onto the reservation, improving communication systems, because we thought we're used to having fires here. And even at that, like I said, the resources were spread so thin, even with local municipalities or other emergency personnel, when everybody is so busy and they're working, like maybe 18-hour shifts, it's really difficult to find the people even to really look at doing search and rescue operations like we needed to, for that small family. There was a search and rescue, but, it was just, it was terrible. It was just, horrific to even think about that. So.
Thank you so much, Chairman Costin.
Yes.
When we come back, what has the Forte band of Chippewas learned from the coronavirus pandemic? We'll have Michael Lagarde join us to tell us about his reporting on the pandemic. For more than a year, tribes have been dealing with the impact of the coronavirus pandemic. After scrambling in the beginning, some tribes are starting to get the pandemic under control. Joining us today is Michael Lagarde. He's the senior producer of the program Almanac North, which airs on WDSE and WRPT in Duluth, Minnesota. The series is called Lessons from COVID-19. It's a look at how tribal governments have responded. Welcome, Michael.
Miigwech, bonjour.
Let's start with the big picture. What's the lead on how tribes have responded?
Well, according to Kathy Chavers, who's the chairwoman of the Bois Forte Nation in Minnesota, she's also the president of the Minnesota Chippewa tribe. She feels that tribes are doing a better job than the state in handling the coronavirus, getting vaccinations out to the people, and just overall dealing with it.
And that in terms of, I guess the headline there would be both in terms of the way people react to it and also vaccinations.
Oh, true. Chairwoman Chavers was practically apologetic when she made that statement about how tribes, at least in Minnesota, were dealing with the coronavirus. I did reach out to a couple of other reservations of the Minnesota Chippewa tribe. I'm from Grand Portage myself, so I reached out to my chairman, and he deferred back to Chairwoman Chavers. Just about 20 miles southwest of here, there's another reservation, but I chose to go with Chairwoman Chavers because, she's also the president, like I said, of the Minnesota Chippewa tribe. So there's some 25,000 plus people that also fall under the umbrella of, trying to figure out what's best and how do we combat or address the pandemic. And, her response to vaccination was, it didn't matter if folks were native or non-native. Employees that work for tribal nations also include non-natives. And, she said it didn't matter. We wanted to vaccinate as many people as possible as soon as possible. And on the reservation, Bois Forte, it's a remote site within the state. It's actually divided between three areas, but the government center is in Net Lake proper. And they've only got 4 speakers, fluent speakers of Ojibwe on the reservation. And those were the people that they were concerned of first. And that's who they focused their energy on when the pandemic shutdown started here in the state a year ago.
Early on, there was concern about adequate supplies of PPE and other equipment. How was it in Minnesota?
Well, just from my understanding and talking with several folks, and that includes leaders in small towns, there was some concern that the supplies were running out. I talked with a medical director from one of the local reservations. He said that working with the federal government and with the state did cause some concern for him at that time when the pandemic was starting out. It seemed like I don't want to speak for any of the tribal leaders or the medical directors, but it was just my understanding that there was some concern that tribes were being left back. The state really didn't include them in the emergency response to the pandemic until maybe a couple of days after the shutdown in the state began. So they did get their monies. They did get enough PPE for their clinics, for the people that they considered vital to running each of the reservations.
We will leave it there. Thank you, Michael Lagarde.
Yeah, definitely. Miigwech.
And that's a slice of our Indigenous world. Thank you for watching. We will be back with another edition tomorrow. I'm Mark Trahan.
Sometimes you got to take a stand just because you know you can. Oh, you got to run, you got to run.
Indian Country Today is produced at the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism and Mass Communications at Arizona State University.
This is Indian Country Today.